Okay, we're going to just dive in. Thank you all for coming. I don't know where you are in Washington, D.C. It's absolutely gorgeous. So if you're in this area, thank you for being on Zoom and not outside. We have two wonderful guests today, Kim Allen, who is the Director of DEMpower, and she's going to be talking about what they do for the Democratic Party and why we are supporting them in Arizona and Michigan. And Mike Lux, who is a political analyst, writer. He is a wonderful place to go if you need a little bit of optimism and hope and just some really good information about, today I think he's talking about working class voters, but whatever he's talking about, he's been on our meetings before, and it's really wonderful to hear whatever he has to say. So thank you both for being here. Really, all I'm going to say is what Mike and Kim and 31st Street and all of you have in common is that we are all people who believe that this is a marathon and that the rhythm for democracy is steady persistence. It is not a rhythm that follows the election cycle anymore. We have finally shifted away from that rhythm to realizing that we have to just steadily do our work all seasons, every year, and not stop. And that's challenging. It's challenging to keep people engaged and energized, but this group manages to do that. Somehow we managed to just keep going and raising money for amazing groups and candidates. And as we, do our work for Arizona and Michigan, after that, we will be shifting our eyes to Virginia, which actually is coming up with an election. But thank you all for being here. You're among the most persistent, and we could not do this without you. We are going to be trying to start raising some money for DEMpower today, even though we're doing a fundraiser on the 30th. They really need the money. You'll hear why. And so we don't really want to waste time and wait for the 30th. We want people to jump in now if you're able to, and we'll be putting the donation link in the chat. So that would be great if you can help them out sooner rather than later. So I'm going to toss it over to Jim for a few words.
So you're right, I'm Jim Shelton. I think everybody pretty much knows me, a political analyst, and I'm going to really pick up on that marathon theme, although maybe a slightly different metaphor. And as always, I'm going to show slides, but I'm not going to show as many as I often do because we have these two great guests. People able to see that and hear me? Great. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to say there's a lot of noise and distraction out there. There's the budget. There's the fact that, is it Trump? Is it DeSantis? To me, I'm not, I don't want to be distracted by that. That's more like spectator politics. I guess that's okay if you want to do spectator politics, but I like doing politics as an action kind of thing. So my plea is that we just really need to keep our eyes on the ball. But I do want to say that there have been some things, and I talked about last month, there's a lingering problem with the American electorate, in my opinion, that a lot of people are down. They're down about the economy, they're down in general, the depression rates are up, and I think a lot of that is affecting the way people look at Biden. But I think hopefully, even if it's just kind of regression to the mean, if you will, that's going to change. And so I do think there are some green shoots, and I'm going to show some data on one of them, which is, interestingly, Gallup's been looking at job satisfaction for a long time, and lo and behold, it's actually continuing to improve. And I looked at their data, and that's a whole bunch of different things that they measure, including home and work balance, which is up as well. And, maybe that'll help put people in a better mood. Another thing that came out this week that I saw is that Catalyst, which is a very highly respected set of folks that do number crunching and data analysis, have found, using data from a number of sources, that in 2022, we did quite well with millennials and Gen X. And hopefully that will continue as well, because, you know, once people start to vote and they start to vote our way, that tends to be helpful. And us baby boomers are gradually moving out of the electorate. All right, so here's the marathon theme. This is more like maybe a football theme, but that the games are won and lost in the off season. And I would never played football or anything like that, but I can well believe that a lot of football coaches subscribe to this. But I do want to talk about the boom and bust election cycle. And I don't think it's time for a requiem yet, because it's still alive very much, and people do get fascinated with elections. But the question is, what happens when everything busts? So just to give you a sense, you know, all these things that we try to support, when the election's over, they atrophy and die off. We lose talent, we lose their knowledge and experience, expertise. Maybe more important than almost anything else, those people, we lose the relationships that they have figured out to work for us. They're wasted resources, things like rent or materials and stuff like that, doesn't get used, yard signs, whatever. But again, maybe the most important thing, I think, is a sense of demoralization, that all these people that get hired up to work with us, then they're let go, and then what are they going to do? Well, they're not going to necessarily want to come back. You know, they're going to look for something else to do. You know, we have this great crop of young people every year that want to come out and work with us, but it's hard to kind of keep them in place. So we, you know, just wanted to give people a sense of that. And the counter point is, of course, that it doesn't take that much money to kind of keep these things going in a way. And if you compare it to the one can compare it to what I call the hyper expensive campaigns, and even in campaigns that are not that hyper expensive, a lot of money gets spent that really has near zero value. You've heard me talk about that many times. All right, so what are we trying to do in our marathon, if you will, or when, you know, working in the off season? You know, there are actually 4 categories that I've put forward, 3 of which I really want us to work on. And the one that we're talking about today is state Democratic parties, which can be supported in a number of ways. But when we talked to Martha Lanning, specifically, and I'll come back to this, she basically said, well, it's really voter protection and DEMpower that needs the support. And here's 2 states where it can really make a difference. So that's why we're focused that way. In addition to realizing, of course, they're important states. Then we got grassroots groups that are very important to support with deep roots, anti-MAGA propaganda. You know, we had this great seminar, almost 500 people on it, that Julie Greenberg and I helped put together with Dan Pfeiffer, so forth. And you know, I went back and looked at the recording, and there were well over 300 people looked views, if you will, of the recording. So hopefully it's getting us moving in ways in that direction. And Julie and I are actually starting to find some things that we think we may put on the table for support in the coming months. Now, there's one more category where we probably will not do that much, just because we can only do so much, and that's voter registration. And the reason why I'm not pushing that for us is it's actually a lot of people working on that, including Simon Rosenberg and many others. It's kind of a crowded space in a way. I'm sure there's a lot of good work to do, and we will look for things for us to do. But in the sort of the zig versus zagging, these first 3 things are actually more appealing to us. So, you know, I always like to show our priority states. And the thing that's different now is that we now added Michigan and Arizona. We were looking at Arizona before. And of course, we know that between Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that's the ball game, basically. And we'll do more things in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But initially, it's a ball game for the presidency, but there are also 3 major Senate races in those states and House races and so forth. So again, we're trying to be strategic, very strategic with our state choice. All right, so I borrowed this from Martha Lanning, who's kind of our compass for these kind of things when it comes to supporting state parties. I'm not going to talk about all the things that go into running a state party. These 3 along the side are the ones that are sort of major interest to us. We've supported organizing. She's saying that they're actually relatively good shape for statistical analysis. The value of what Martha tries to do is to get economies of scale by providing technical assistance, because these state Democratic parties are thin, and they don't have the ability to have the kind of technical expertise that one would really like to have in-house. So the idea is to have across states support, and that brings us to what she's calling democracy protection, but I'm going to call voter protection, and that's what Kim does. And that's what she's saying is really needed, and I can believe it, because as we know, there's still a lot of election deniers, and there's still Trump and his MAGA folks trying to upset our elections and so forth. And as Lisa mentioned, it turns out that this particular area is one where the boom and bust has actually hurt quite a bit. They've had quite a bit of bust, and they need some boom, and so that's why we selected them, because the money will really go for something that's needed. All right, so I'm about to shift to introduce Mike, and as he knows, we don't give long introductions, but just to say a couple of things that, he really is a guru about what's going on with in the political scene, and he's a major friend of 31st Street. So I'm just going to go ahead and now turn it over to Mike. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thanks to Lisa and to everybody who's involved with 31st Street. I'm so impressed with what you all have been able to do. Dre and I have been friends for more than 40 years, and Dre, when 31st Street started, Dre said, I think what my wife is doing is actually going to change the world. 31st Street is amazing what they're able to do. And now that I've been following it, I know that's true. So thank you all for everything you do. I just want to make a few comments about Democratic Party infrastructure and related to the working class voters that I spend most of my time studying. There's a myth out there that okay, there's base voters, and then there's working class voters, and we're sucking wind with working class voters. It's, as you all can imagine and have talked about, I'm sure, it's so much more complicated than that. For one thing, most base voters are actually working class voters. They're young people just getting started. They don't have as much money. They're hard pressed by when there's inflation, that's tough on them. When there's job losses, that's tough on them. And so these categories are not like these two distinct separate things at all. There's huge overlaps. Yes, there are base voters who are more upper class. There's base voters who have multiple college degrees, but the large majority of Democratic base voters are in that working class camp. I would also make the comment that while we have had messaging problems over many years in the Democratic Party with working class voters. I think that Democratic politicians are getting it more and more what we need to be saying. I think that's it's a long road. It's not a clear thing. There are some politicians that don't get it at all. But I think when you look at where politicians like Sherrod Brown or Tammy Baldwin or Joe Biden are coming from, they get it to a large extent. The biggest challenge that we have is how do you get a good economic message out to voters. And so I think that's what I want to focus on today, because I know you all are focused on infrastructure. And the first point that I want to make in terms of that is, if you look at Sinclair News, do you all know what Sinclair News is? I'm guessing you do. It's this terrible right-wing media corporation. Sinclair has two sister media companies that also own local TV stations and that also carry a strong right-wing orientation. Between the three of them, they now own a little over 50%. Say that again, a little over 50% of local TV stations in the country. I'm in the process right now of charting where all they own these stations, but it won't come as a shock to you that in the battleground states that you're targeting, the battleground states for the Senate, for the presidency, for and the districts for House races, these three right-wing media companies are dominant in those media markets. So when folks like myself and Celinda Lake and others have done polling and focus groups among working class voters, what we find is that people don't trust national news at all. They think of it as biased, but they have a tendency to trust local news. They tend to think of it as unbiased, but that is like one of our core challenges. How do we get through? I just want to sort of make the point that we have to understand whether it's old-fashioned organizing or organizing with cool tech tools. We have to get back to a sense that we're out talking to people, relating to people, giving our message to folks in a grassroots kind of way. We've got to do it through Facebook pages. We've got to do it through other social media. We've got to do it door to door. The only way to do it is to build infrastructure in these local counties. We have a real opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we've seen in 2022 and 2020. We have a real opportunity in a lot of counties where we had been getting crushed in 2014, 2016. We really have the chance to make up ground in these places. Our polling shows that people respond to an economic populist message, the kind of stuff that Dre has done so effectively for his whole career in South Dakota. People respond to that. They like politicians who are willing to take on wealthy special interests and wealthy corporations and big CEOs. But the question is how you get that message to people in a credible way. And I will tell you that just doing TV ads the last couple months of the campaign is the least persuasive way to do that. It's not that people don't ever watch TV ads or aren't ever influenced by them, but we would show voters, swing voters in our focus groups. We would show them ads that sounded exactly like what the voters had been saying in the focus groups. I mean, like literally word for word, because we had done our pre-polling and we had done our pre-analysis, and we had written ads that we thought would be very effective, and they were rated well. People liked what was said, but overwhelmingly people were like, well, politicians just all say stuff to appeal to us, even though we agree with what the ad says. We don't believe TV ads. There's such a cynicism out there. People feel like nobody cares about them, nobody remembers them. They feel forgotten, they feel alienated. So it's going to take the kind of local infrastructure, state party infrastructure that brings these voters back to us. So I just want to say a word about the importance of state parties. So I've been working on presidential elections now for about 40 years. My first one was Walter Mondale in 1984. There have been times when the state party has been so ineffective in a key battleground state that we have had to devise other ways of doing grassroots work in that state. Literally had to create other organizations completely outside of the state party. That is such an unfortunate thing. But if you have a strong state party, if you have a state party that really builds deep roots in the grassroots in a state and does county organization, precinct organization, that knows what it's doing, that is reasonably well funded. When I say reasonably, state parties are never funded to the extent that I would like them to be, because people just sort of, it's not sexy. It's not what people think is important. But if state parties are effective and well funded, it can make such a difference. Because one of the things that I hear in the polling, the focus groups, over and over and over again, and this is from both base voters and swing voters, it's from working class voters especially. They are absolutely convinced that politicians only pay attention to them, only talk to them, only listen to them the last few weeks of a campaign. And they are very cynical about that. But if you get there early and you're talking to them about issues they care about, you're listening to them about the issues they care about, people respond to that. It's really important. And so I am a huge believer in effectively funding state parties, in structuring them in a way that's really goes out into the field and goes out into neighborhoods and counties that don't normally get touched by politicians. I think it's one of the most effective things we can be doing. And whatever metaphor you want to use, the marathon metaphor or Jim's off-season metaphor, it's all true. We cannot think about elections being only decided the last month, the last 2 months. Elections are being decided. Elections for 2024, for the presidential, for the Senate, for House races, they're being decided right now. As we sit here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon in May of a quote unquote off year. I mean, it's not for those of you in Virginia, but for most people, the getting to people, talking to people about real issues that matter to people, about their health care, about their jobs, about their retirement security, about taxes, about the budget fight, getting into people's homes, figuring out how to build community and rebuild community. That is what's going to matter. And if we can figure out how to do that, we will win. I want to close on this point. And I am an optimist, by the way. The memo that someone just sent a link to that will give you a flavor of why I think we will do well in 2024. But Republicans are now completely out in the open about wanting to shut down voting for constituencies that they don't like and that don't support them. My colleague Lauren Windsor, who is one of the things she does is she's got an independent journalism project, and she sends people undercover into Republican and right-wing meetings. She got somebody into a Republican, an RNC meeting that was completely off the record, completely off press, but she got somebody in there who recorded the speeches. And a woman named Cleta Mitchell, who is one of Trump's top lawyers, gave a speech about how we have to shut down youth voting and early voting. How important it is to keep young people from voting. It was too easy for young people to vote. They shouldn't be able to wake up in their dorm room and go vote. And she said, and if we can take over the Virginia legislature in this year's election, we can end 45 days of early voting, and that would help us so much in future elections. And she was just absolutely blatant about it. This was at an RNC meeting. This wasn't some right-wing crazy meeting. I mean, I guess the RNC actually is that, but this was the actual Republican Party where she was talking in this fashion. So we have to fight for people's right to vote. We have to fight for making it easier, not harder to vote. And we have to do everything in our power to organize at the grassroots level. And we definitely need, those of you in Virginia, we definitely need to win these Virginia elections this year. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Mike. That was all incredibly helpful and inspiring, even though terrifying and inspiring. So we're going to turn it over to Kim Allen to talk to us about DEMpower and explain exactly why it is so important to support them right now.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks, Jim, for having me on. Mike, I was nodding my head the whole time, and like Mike is singing off of my choir sheet, because I just want to underscore everything you said. We do have to fight to make voting easier. And part of the theme of my presentation is there's actually so much we can do. And I personally find it inspiring and empowering, to hear that kind of message. So I hope you feel the same way as well. So let me just go ahead and share my presentation. I want to start by telling you a bit about myself. During the 2020 cycle, I was part of the leadership of the voter protection team at the Democratic Party of Georgia. And our work made the margin of victory for President Biden and for Senators Ossoff and Warnock. I was at the time a commercial litigator, and I was just so deeply moved by the impact of this work that I decided to step away from my law practice and devote myself to voter protection full time. And so as part of that, I'm co-founding an organization called DEMpower Labs. And just in brief, we are voter protection experts. We've worked in 43 states across 6 election cycles, and our mission is to offer expertise and support to voter protection programs at state Democratic parties. To understand our work, it helps to set the stage. So just to give you a heads up, we're going to do a deep dive here. I know you guys are very much the tried and true members here at 31st Street, and I think you guys are ready for this kind of deep dive, so just buckle up. But I'm going to start by answering one of our most frequently asked questions, which is, what do we mean when we talk about voter protection? Well, in short, voter protection picks up where get out the vote efforts leave off. We've seen it's not enough to register and engage and turn out voters. If we're going to win elections, we have to get those voters over the finish line. And that means we have to ensure that every voter can vote, that every vote is counted, and ultimately that the election wins are certified. And that's what voter protection does. How do we accomplish that mission? Voter protection work falls into 3 overarching categories. The first is administering elections. Most people think that our elections are nonpartisan, but in fact, political parties actually do have roles to play in administering elections, and I'll tell you a lot more about that. Voter protection also monitors elections and responds to threats. And then it also educates voters on when, where, and how to vote. So those are the big three categories. And I want to go into a little more detail here about the work that spans those three categories. I previewed I'm going to do a deep dive, and this is where we get a little more into the weeds about the work of these voter protection programs. And my hope is you come away with a sense of what this work is and why it's so incredibly important. So I'm going to start with the work that you might have heard of: poll watching, boiler rooms, and hotlines. These three categories of work help to triage voter issues that come in, including on election day, and helps voters cast their ballots. Poll watchers observe inside of polling places. They watch for any kind of shenanigans like turning voters away who are eligible to vote. Hotline volunteers take calls from voters who have questions about voting or have issues who come up. And then the boiler room is the command center. During early voting and election day, it's usually staffed by attorneys, and they coordinate volunteers and they put out fires that come up while voting is happening. And these three programs are what I would call voter protection 1.0. This is more reactive and defensive. It's responding to issues that come up in the weeks before election day. And that's historically what most of voter protection has looked like. But in recent years, since 2018 and 2020, voter protection has begun evolving. And when it's done right, it goes on the offensive and is not just on the defensive. One of these categories of more offensive voter protection is election administration. We have authority under state laws to appoint election officials like election board members, canvassing board members, and poll workers. And these folks actually run elections, including running polling places on election day. That's obviously a really incredibly important power that we have to make sure that we exercise, because Republicans are doing it. They're savvy too. So we have to make sure we do our part and exercise that authority when we have it. Election monitoring. So this is sending volunteers to monthly Board of Election meetings and watching as they set budgets, as they decide training protocols for poll workers and so on. It's also building relationships with elections officials and then leveraging those relationships to advocate for voting access, like additional polling locations or additional voting hours. And then also, of course, the information that you glean from monitoring elections will allow you to respond to threats as they arise, like voter purges, elimination of polling locations, or cutting Sunday voting. You can then get folks out there to go to election board meetings and protest against that kind of activity. Next is the post-election work. The fight for democracy doesn't end on election day. After polls close, there's still a ton of work to be done to make sure that we get the right result in our elections. That includes adjudicating votes. When folks hand mark a paper ballot, sometimes they cross something out and they circle something else. Sometimes they write in a vote, and there has to be someone who decides whether and how that vote gets counted. Well, little known fact is that in some states, we can appoint the members of the panels that adjudicate those votes and decide how they get counted. That's really important. Ballot cure, lots of folks who vote by mail or who vote a provisional ballot on election day have to take some other step to get their vote counted. There's some technical defect that means their vote won't be counted unless they turn in an ID or do something else. And so ballot cure programs reach out to these voters, notify them that their ballot has been rejected, and then gives them the information they need, and sometimes even a ride to the elections office to get their vote counted. So that's obviously very critical as well. There's vote canvassing and certification. We often appoint vote canvassers who sit on these boards. They tally the votes and they reconcile the vote totals if there's some discrepancy, and then they certify the election results. We both participate in that process and monitor those processes. And then recounts. If it's a very close election, then often these races will go to a recount. And it's important we organize volunteers to make sure that all the processes get followed and that the recounts run smoothly and that Republicans don't get up to shenanigans and try to disrupt the count. So, a well-run voter protection program doesn't just include this, but it also should be integrated into the broader work of the Democratic Party. They should work closely with field programs and campaigns to ensure that we're giving accurate and helpful information to voters on when, where, and how to vote. And it also works to build the party by coordinating with key partners, including county Democrats and progressive organizations. And so the goal here is to build a massive coalition of people who share our values and then create a movement that fights for voters and democracy. So I want to highlight a couple of key reasons why this work is so impactful. And, Mike certainly touched on this. Republicans are working overtime to suppress voters, and not just any voters. They're targeting voters of color in particular. And so these voters are more likely to experience voter intimidation. They're targeted by polling place closures and more likely to wait in a long line to vote. And they're also more likely to have their ballots rejected and not counted. And so voter protection fights for these voters in particular and empowers them to make their voices heard. That's obviously very critical for us because these are our voters, and we want to make sure that we help them make their voices heard in our democracy. A second reason why this work is so impactful, voter protection work wins elections. And as just a few examples, voter protection programs made the margin of victory for President Biden in Wisconsin and Georgia in 2020. They cured more votes than President Biden's margin. In Arizona last year, voter protection cured 3,400 ballots, and the AG's race was won by 280. And that's a key reason why we don't have an election denier in the Attorney General's office in Arizona today. It also critically put the governor's race past the margin for a recount, which helped to insulate that race from some of Kari Lake's attacks and from election subversion efforts in Arizona. And then in Pennsylvania, in House District 151, we flipped the Pennsylvania House by just 58 votes and helped secure 100 votes, which made that margin. We as DEMpower Labs were in both Arizona and Pennsylvania last year and helping to secure those victories. And so we saw firsthand just how this work makes a critical impact in these key races. So, as we look ahead to 2024, voter protection is going to continue to play a critical role in winning in battleground states. We hear from folks who say, shouldn't democracy work be done on the nonpartisan side? And the answer is yes, but we need both. Nonpartisan groups have a role to play, but so do state Democratic parties. And I want to highlight 4 key reasons why. The first is the Democratic Party has candidates on the ballot, and so they have a stake in the outcome of the election, and that gives them a special kind of standing to advocate for effective election administration. The second is state parties have the voter file, which helps us identify Democratic voters and then target our work to help those voters. Nonpartisan groups can't do that. The third is that state and county parties have unique roles to play in election administration under state laws, which is something I've touched on. Nationwide, 60% of local election officials are either partisan elected or partisan appointed. And that includes all those roles I mentioned before, like election board members, poll workers, and canvassing board members. And then fourth, state and county parties also have the sole authority under state laws to appoint certain voter protection roles, such as poll watchers who observe inside of polling places. So, my message here is intended to be really inspiring and empowering. We have an incredible opportunity to use these tools that we have to save democracy if we have the resources to do that. But there's also an obstacle. You saw how expansive voter protection programs can be, and there is a huge learning curve to doing this work effectively because the work is so broad. And that's particularly hard because the churn of campaigns, that sort of boom and bust that Jim referred to, and staff turnover leads to this perpetual loss of institutional knowledge and best practices. And so voter protection directors tell us, they feel like they're constantly reinventing the wheel and they need concrete solutions to do this work effectively. So that's where we come in as DEMpower Labs. Our mission is to build effective state party voter protection programs. We've been in the trenches ourselves and we've seen what it's like to have to build a program from scratch. And we said to ourselves, what if we didn't have to do this? What if it didn't have to be like this? And so we set out to make 2 big overarching changes. The first is that voter protection programs need expertise. They need, practical documents like templates and toolkits and how-tos and trainings and other kinds of strategic support to do their work effectively so that they're not having to start over from scratch. And then the second is, someone needs to be a repository of knowledge and best practices across states. we've seen that historically voter protection programs are siloed. And so sometimes one state will hit upon a great idea, like how to recruit volunteers creatively, and then other states never hear about it. So part of the reason why we created DEMpower Labs is to create that forum and to create that kind of repository of knowledge. By working hand in hand with voter protection programs, we give them expertise and support, and we also learn from their success, and we can then cross-pollinate. We can share those ideas with other states and help them learn from one another. So we're working with state Democratic parties this year, and the reason for that is that there are no off years in democracy. And I think I'm like preaching to the choir here. You know, Republicans aren't taking time off, and neither can we. And so in the remaining time that I have, I want to highlight some of the critical work that can be done right now in Arizona and Michigan. You know, in Arizona, this is the first year that they've run a year-round voter protection program. And what that means is every election we've been playing defense and not offense. There are these chronic problems that never get addressed because by August or September of an election year, it's just too late. The die is already cast. And so this year we have a chance to switch from being on defense to being on offense. And that's really exciting. You know, one of the best things we can do this year is advocate for voter access, including on college campuses and especially on tribal lands. And so I want to give one example of this, Apache County. It's incredibly difficult for Navajo Nation voters to cast a ballot in Apache County. That county covers 10,000 square miles, okay, which is just absolutely enormous. But in 2022, they had about one early voting site per 1,000 square miles. Okay, and so voting early is not easy in Apache County. The Navajo Nation has the highest rate of out of precinct voting in Arizona due to voter confusion regarding the location of their polling place. And so in Arizona, if you vote at the wrong polling place on election day, your vote simply does not count. And so there's an opportunity here. Some creative solutions could really make a difference if we created vote centers you know, in Apache County on the Navajo Nation lands. That would solve the problem entirely because anyone in the county can vote at any vote center. And so that's like number one, is if we can advocate for expanded voter access, we can mitigate some of these chronic problems that have kept voters in Apache County from casting a ballot and from getting their votes counted. And then number two, we also have to fight right now for effective election administration, including and maybe especially in Republican counties. And I'll give one example here. You know, back in November, Pinal County failed to count hundreds of ballots, and those mistakes only surfaced because there was a statewide recount of the Attorney General's race. And that's obviously a huge problem, in part because it feeds all these conspiracy theories where Republicans say that votes are not being counted. And this gives some credence to those theories, right? And the county has not been transparent about those issues publicly, but there's an opportunity now to work quietly behind the scenes to advocate for better practices. You know, and I hear from folks who say, how is it possible to work with officials in red counties? And the answer is there's actually a surprising alignment of interests here because Republicans want to maximize votes in red counties. They want all their votes to get counted. And we also want elections to go smoothly because we want our statewide wins to get certified. And so sometimes there are these quiet opportunities to work hand in hand and find solutions to problems, even in red counties. And if we do that, we can shore up elections. I want to highlight Michigan also. We have a Democratic trifecta, and we've heard from folks who say, we don't need to worry about Michigan. Michigan is in good shape, you know, but the fact is we can't take anything for granted. Republicans are mobilizing in a big way in Michigan, and so we have to be prepared. I want to preface this by saying Michigan has one of the most decentralized election administration structures in the country. So in most states, like in Arizona, elections are run at the county level, but in Michigan, elections are administered at the local city and township level, and then they are certified at the county level. And so what that means is there are over 1,600 election administrators in Michigan compared to 15 county recorders in Arizona. Okay, so organizing around elections is a really complex job in Michigan. And right now, the voter protection staff, there are just 2 people in Arizona working on this. There's a brand new voter protection director who's working to build the program this year. And she's obviously, as you can guess, it's a big job. She's very excited to have our help to do it. Probably the single most important thing we can do this year is build a firewall around election administration and election certification. And I want to highlight a couple of key opportunities to do that. on October 31st, half of the members of the county canvassing boards are going to be replaced. These boards have 4 members, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and they have a very crucial job. They reconcile vote totals and then certify election results. So before October 31, Democrats have to provide 3 names at the county level that we propose to serve on each county board. And then the county commissioners vote on which of those 3 is going to get appointed. So we have to work now to make sure that we appoint Democrats who are strong, democracy-minded Democrats to these county canvass boards, and that'll help them learn the ropes. They'll start working before November of next year, and then practice around some of these smaller turnout elections, and hopefully they'll be on their feet in time for November 2024. Then we also have to work to mitigate election deniers who are trying to take over these boards. And I'll give you an example of one county that I've been asked not to name. It's a Republican-controlled county, and a Christian nationalist group has primaried the relatively moderate Republican county commissioners last year. And so now the county is being run by total Republican extremists, and there's a real risk that the folks that they appoint to the county boards are going to be people like them who are not democracy minded. And so if even one county fails to certify the election results, that causes big problems in Michigan. So we have to work around those kinds of issues and find creative opportunities, monitor the activity of these folks, and then take those opportunities when we can find them. Similarly, we saw last year, there's a number of Republican poll workers who are election deniers. We have the authority to challenge the appointment of these poll workers. And so we need to use that authority where we can, and identify folks and get them out. And then, of course, we also have to keep an eye on the election clerks who run elections at the local and township level. We have a pretty good idea of where those election deniers are. And so monitoring them is also going to be very key. So those are just a few ideas for things we can do this year. It's incredibly important. As I mentioned, I stepped away from my law practice to do this work because I saw how compelling and impactful it is. And so we feel very excited to get to do this work. We just need the resources to do it. I know that there's already been contributions coming in. I want to say my own personal thanks. It means so much to me personally to have the support of all of you. And we are just so grateful to get to do this work. So thank you.
That was amazing. That was really, really clear. For as much information as you just laid down, it was all incredibly clear. And it makes my head explode, but I'm so glad you exist. Thank goodness you exist. And thank you to everybody who's been donating. That's wonderful. It's really important. We're going to have a few questions and answers in a minute, but first I'm going to go to Mary Pence to just underline the need to donate. Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Pence. I'm part of the 31st Street leadership team, and I want to talk to you for just a minute about hope. Here's what I wanted to tell you about hope. There's this wonderful columnist named Amanda Ripley, and she says that hope is more like a muscle than an emotion. And I just want you to think about that for a minute. Hope is a muscle, not an emotion. And she says it is the belief that your future can be brighter and better than your past, and that you actually have a role to play in making it better. So some of the reasons that we have hope in this past week, you've read about, particularly in Robert Hubble, Jacksonville, Florida, this wonderful Democrat, Donna Deegan, elected mayor, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. So why are we having hope right now? And I want to read you a wonderful quote from the wonderful Simon Rosenberg. He says, the simplest explanation for what we're seeing is that those conditions that helped drive 2022, that is abortion extremism, ongoing GOP encouraged gun violence, extremist MAGA candidates running in the primaries, those are still very much with us in 2023. But what is also still with us is a Democratic Party ably led by Joe Biden, continuing to make things better for the American people. And listen to this, and a fired up Democratic grassroots, which continues through donations and hard work to push our electoral performances to the upper end of what is possible. So you here today on this call have a role to play in creating more reasons for hope in the coming month. So you've heard from Kim why DEMpower is going to make a difference in Arizona and Michigan, but they need money to do that. And you heard from Jim that money now, as opposed to money on the date of our fundraiser or even later, money now is what they really need. So that brings me to my request, and that is to contribute to DEMpower at a level that reflects your belief in and commitment to saving democracy. For my husband, Dan, and me, that level is $4,000. And each of us have unique financial circumstances, and each of us have a unique ability to contribute. But here's my request to you, to go now to the link that Lisa has been putting in the chat, to click on that link and to give an amount that reflects your belief in and commitment to saving our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you to everybody who has been donating throughout the program. I think listening to Kim really got a lot of people to click that link. So thank you very much. We're going to just take a very little while to ask if anybody has questions. If you want to just wave at me, I can give you a call. John?
Yeah, question for Kim. How did you choose Michigan instead of Wisconsin? Just curious. I mean, it's obvious that Arizona really needs help, but you think of both Michigan, with the trifecta, and Wisconsin with the blowout by Justice Protasewicz. How did you choose Michigan and not Wisconsin? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So we are hoping to work with more states this year, not only Michigan and Arizona, but also Wisconsin is on our list as well. Part of the reason why it's not part of this fundraiser today is that the Democratic Party in Wisconsin fundraises an incredible amount. And so they really don't need as much support to fund this work. So at least not at the present. So it's really more a matter of priorities in terms of channeling support to state parties where that support is going to enable us to do our work.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm scanning just your faces. You can also put it in the chat. Okay. Well, I think your thoroughness really worked. I think people got a lot of information. So thank you all for coming. Save the date if you live in the DC area for our June 3rd picnic, live in person, June 3rd. You'll get more information about that in our newsletter. And thank you all for attending. And don't forget our May 30th fundraiser for DEMpower. And you can tell your friends to come to that. And you can vouch for Kim's presentation because you have heard it. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.